I'm Donald Moffat.
And I'm Heather Menzies. Logan's Run will not be on tonight.
But stay tuned for the Charlie Brown special and the Fat Albert Halloween special.
And we'll be back next Monday night.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
Hi, I'm Alex Ross.
The two pieces are sort of a type. They're both kind of recreations of artwork that existed in the 90s. In fact, this piece here for the Avengers is in most ways a recreation or a tribute to George Perez's poster version from the mid-90s, where he did a shot that featured in it a figure of Captain America that was very similar to what I've done here, positioning of the Vision or positioning of Hawkeye, and I believe a few other elements are very similar to that piece, and it's consciously so. I was building off that inspiration, but I kind of refitted my design to fill out bigger shots of the figures so that I was making a wider composition and getting in a lot of the same characters, but still not quite as many as what George himself did, because George's thing was always to try and get in the maximum amount of content into pieces that he did.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Always happy to welcome Michael Kronenberg back to Word Balloon. Mike and I are friends. I love his work. He does amazing things for magazines like Back Issue. And in fact, I don't know if it's out yet or not, Mike.
It is out. It's been out for quite a while.
Oh, okay. Well, this is the latest Back Issue, everybody, and it's a tribute to Neal Adams. And Mike composed the cover. And in some ways, I want you to explain it, Mike. What did you do for this cover?
Well, Michael Urey, who's the editor and who's a good friend, and who I wrote the Batcave Companion with, he kind of came up with this idea to kind of incorporate that classic cover. And I believe it's Batman 232. I gotta look. I got it over on my comic book rack.
All right. It is a classic.
It is a classic cover.
And also a great story. I mean, it really kind of wasn't this the coffin story that like kind of where here, okay, let me take this down and we'll let Mike show it. There we go. Right.
Yeah, so the Demon of Gothos Mansion 2. It's Batman 227. So it's a classic cover, and it's actually Neal's kind of ode to an old Bob Kane cover from Detective Comics that featured the villain, the Scorpion. I think he was the Scorpion, right? Or
I don't remember that, but I
do
the original image.
And so that was in Batman's first year, and when he was solo before Robin in 1939. So anyways, Michael asked me. He said, "Let's take this cover and let's the original cover, and can you make a cover out of this for Back Issue?" Because
Sure.
We wanted to do this dedication to Neal after Neal died. So basically, what I did was create, through Photoshop and through InDesign, I created a logo that was a Neal Adams logo for Back Issue, and they feature inside the issue my interview with Neal that I did with him. God, I guess it's about 20 years ago. I went to Continuity and interviewed him for 2 days, and I spoke to him. You were showing the Batcave Companion. That
Yes.
interview originally appeared. It first appeared in Comic Book Marketplace when I was working for Russ Cochran. He was the editor, and then we kind of repurposed it for Batcave Companion. But I went up to Neal's studio in New York and got to meet him, and that was like a thrill of a lifetime for me because, I mean, it's an old story. So many people, grew up, loving Neal, and he was an influence for me. It's like I became an artist because of Neal. I told him that too. How many people have told Neal Adams, I became an artist because of you. I started reading comics because of you. And truly it was the same for me. I got into comics and became a serious reader of comics. I was like 8 years old when I saw this issue of Batman that I'm wearing.
Sure.
Batman 232. I saw it at a 7-Eleven when I was a kid. And it just knocked me out. I'd never seen anything like that before. And it turned his art. And also I want to talk about Denny O'Neil's story. Today is the date. 3 years ago, Denny died 3 years ago today. And I interviewed Denny also for the Batcave Companion. But between Denny's story writing and Neal's art, it changed me from just like a kid who read comic books and just read them and throw them out, became disposable entertainment, to becoming a collector. I became a collector after that. I mean, it was mainly the influence of his art, and it's like I finally noticed who the artist. I looked at that name. It never mattered to me before as a kid, reading comics. I saw, I didn't pay attention to the name, but this I had to pay attention. And from then on, it's like, it wasn't just Neal. It was like I started looking at comic books differently. I started looking at the art differently, and I was gravitating towards different artists, whether it was Gene Colan or John Buscema, Gil Kane, John Romita. So I started noticing, it all started with Neal. At that time, we're talking 1971. So he's got maybe 2-3 more years of real working in comics before he kind of like got out. By 75, he's pretty much gone.
He started continuity and with Dick Giordano, and then also in the I'm assuming it was late 80s or very early 90s, continuity was making comics, and he had Bucky O'Hare and his various titles there, which were a lot of weird kind of funny animal or anamorphic kind of action heroes that were animals, and didn't have the punch that he had.
No, Ms. Mystic was another one.
Right. But it was he was really Neal Adams and Denny were the transition team from the leftover vibe of the 66 Adam West Batman show, which by then had already run its course. Batman was, they really leaned into it during the Adam West years to make it campy and make it hokey and everything.
Exactly.
And Neal and Denny were the ones that are like, wait a minute, this is a great detective character. Let's bring him back to his basics. And I mean, my God, I had that Bonanza published Batman from the 30s to the 70s.
So I have it. It's right in my bookcase over there. I have the same copy that I bought when I was 8 years old.
It was one of my Christmas presents. It was like the greatest Christmas I ever had.
It was a Hanukkah present for me.
There you go, man. Because it was Batman and Superman from the 30s to the 70s.
Exactly. Both of those hugely influential books. I think I've come across so many people who talk about that. Who grew up in the 70s and read comics in the 70s. Well, I wrote in detail in the Batcave Companion all about how that transition that you were talking about, of how, because the first half of the book is written by Michael Urey, and Michael basically takes the New Look Batman, which started in '64 when Julius Schwartz and Carmine Infantino
was the artist,
circle around the bat, and they made him more of a detective, and they changed the tone that had been going on. It was like it was getting very kind of strange with like science fiction elements to it and so forth. So, but anyways, so Michael's half of the book is 1964 to 69, and then I take over when in 1970 I go from 70 to 79, and I explore exactly what you're talking about, which is that transition, that how the camp era was kind of dying out. You know, the show had been canceled, and you know, the sales are slagging and getting really bad. And true comic book fans like us, you know, who wanted Batman to actually go back, and we're talking 1970. So, you know, Marvel had already gotten into, you know, more relative comics that were relative to our times and that were going on. And it was like, you know, the stuff that Lee, Kirby, and Ditko were doing. I think fans of DC Comics wanted to see that going on in DC too.
Yeah.
And what the demand was is like, let's bring, like, the fans wanted Batman to go back. They were writing into Schwartz, who was the editor of Detective and Batman, and they were writing in saying, we want Batman to go back to the way he was in 1939 without Robin. We want this dark character. So I think at first Schwartz was kind of reticent about doing this. He just wasn't sure. And Neal in Brave and the Bold, see, Schwartz would not allow Neal to be the artist. Neal asked, he wanted to be the Batman artist. He loved Batman growing up as a kid. When I talked to Neal about it, he said he created, when he was a kid, an encyclopedia, a Batman encyclopedia of like drawings and notes all about Batman. This is when he was a kid. He loved Batman. And he grew up with the Batman, the Dick Sprang Batman. And so Schwartz wouldn't allow Neal to draw. He wanted at first to be a detective, and he wouldn't allow him. He said, no, absolutely not. You can't. You know, and of course, Neal, if people don't know, Neal came over from commercial art and from newspaper strips. He had been very successful Ben Casey strip, newspaper strip.
Yes.
Came over to comics. Very similar almost to Steranko. You know, Steranko had a very successful career as a magician and an escape artist and in advertising. And he comes to comics, and it's almost like the thought of someone who is a new, successful syndicated comic strip artist like Neal to come, you're slumming it going over to comics, because that was a time where writers were not even proud to say they hit it. You know, they were almost, I don't know, embarrassed, but it was like, you know, nobody cared about comics the way they do now.
Well, even Will Eisner would, at cocktail parties, that's where the phrase graphic novel came from, rather than comic books, to kind of cover the fact that he was, as you say, slumming in comics. So yeah.
Right. So, you know, so Neal comes over, he's got a reputation already. And the fact that Schwartz is just like, you know, saying, no, you can't do Batman. So what ended up happening was Murray Boltinoff was the editor of Brave and the Bold.
Yep.
And they struck up kind of a friendship, and he told Neal, yeah, you could come over, do Batman and do the team up book. So what Neal ended up doing was, and if people are familiar with those Brave and the Bold issues, Neal, first of all, he loved Bob Haney. He loved Bob Haney's writing. But what he ended up doing was he took the script and he made sure Batman was always shown in the shadows and at night, and only at night. And he started to, you know, gradually show Batman as this creature of the night. You know, the character, the thing that all the fans actually all wanted. And I don't know if Neal was in tune with what the fans wanted. It was what Neal wanted. He saw Batman. That's how Batman needed to be.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening, long story short, how he ended up working with Schwartz and how he started on Detective after this, was that all these fans were writing in. It's like they were getting tons of letters. And look, this is a time where it's like, that's comic fandom. Comic fandom was writing letters to the editor, was writing into DC, writing into Marvel. And they were getting tons of letters, and all the letters were talking about, like, you know, who is this guy? We want more Neal Adams. Why isn't he doing the regular Batman comics? And finally, you know, Schwartz relinquished and teamed up, you know, Denny with Neal to start doing Batman. Secret of the Waiting Graves is really the first. I mean, Denny said this to me, and Neal kind of talked about it too. was that is what set up the Batman that we know now. Is that it started right? It started right there.
Absolutely, yeah. No, you're right, man. And again, the problem was, and as you know, you mentioned Dick Sprang, and those are kind of 50s Batman comics. Really very early on, especially when they introduced Robin, it went from bringing this very shadowy back alley character, very noirish in presentation, to Batman getting a badge and being a deputized, honorary Gotham policeman, and all of a sudden everything was in the sunlight. And God, I in fact, I was last week just talking about it with Tim Seeley. We did a panel at Terrificon, the Connecticut Comic-Con show that I do every July. It's coming up again this year. And we had a Robin panel. We had Denny, Mike Barr from Batman and the Outsiders, and of course his amazing Batman run, Pete Tomasi and Tim, and Jim Starlin. And all of a sudden we got into a conversation about Robin. And Denny couldn't help it. And Denny's like, I hated Robin. He goes, Robin was annoying. He goes, my God, he's a target to draw gunfire away from Batman. Why do you think he's dressed that way? And all of the old timers like Starlin and Barr are like, yeah, I didn't like Robin either, or whatever. And
and that's what Denny told me. It was like he never understood Robin, and you could tell that from his writing, because Robin is in some of these stories. And
like the Ra's al Ghul first appearance and stuff.
Correct. The Night of the Reaper, where he's in that also.
And he kidnaps Robin. Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. So I took that cue as a kid of the way he had Robin, which was like, although Batman does say in one of the Ra's al Ghul issues, he does say that he wants Dick Grayson to take over the mantle of Batman, because his thought is like, I'm going on this mission, I might die. I feel confident in him becoming that.
Yeah.
However, he does treat him as a kid.
Yes.
And he does kind of like, he talks down to him a bit. And that, that's Denny. That's the way Denny was writing it. And so I never liked Robin either. I always liked Batman solo.
Well, they were smart, and they sent Robin off to college and off to solo adventures again, which he had even going back to the 40s and stuff. But that was kind of a smart move. And honestly, we wouldn't have the modern Nightwing if it weren't for that kind of editorial decision of let Dick go off and let Batman be Batman. And that's when literally, and it's this great issue where Dick goes off to Hudson College, and
one bullet too many.
That's absolutely right. Frank Robbins, right?
Frank Robbins wrote that. So yeah, Frank Robbins was heavily involved in this switch, and mainly as a writer. He was, of course, he was known as a very successful syndicated comic strip artist.
Brilliant illustrator, absolutely, and of course his run on the Invaders at Marvel as well with
and Captain America. He did several issues of Captain America, from when Steve Englehart was just at the tail end of Steve Englehart's run.
Yep.
So Frank Robbins was involved with it, and he wrote a lot of those stories. It wasn't just Denny who was writing these stories.
No, in fact,
Frank Robbins was. Frank Robbins wrote the Man-Bat stories. Neal created Man-Bat, but Frank Robbins wrote those stories.
Yes.
But
and not only did Neal, make his mark in the comics, but they were smart enough to use Neal for DC calendars, a lot of merchandise, a lot of the style guide and stuff, and in fact, other contemporaries like Don Newton kind of aped a 70s Batman style from Neal. The
Jim
one guy
Aparo
that
did. Jim Aparo.
See, I don't mean to correct you, Mike, but Neal himself put the brakes on with me, saying, well, Jim Aparo was doing your Batman as well. And he said, no. He said,
well, Jim Aparo said he was. Jim Aparo said,
okay,
Neal was a huge influence on him and a huge influence on Irv Novick and all the Batman artists. They couldn't help but be influenced by what he was doing.
I agree with
and I think you can see that. You can see a difference in Look, I love Aparo. I
Oh,
mean,
no, and so
he
do
doesn't.
I. And I saw the similarity, and it's great that Jim said that. It just listen. I love Neal Adams. He has nothing to apologize for. He loved Neal Adams even more, and I mean,
Oh
Neal
yeah,
had
oh
a big,
yeah,
had a
oh
big
yeah. Oh,
ego,
Neil had a huge,
and it
Neil
floored
had
me.
a very large ego.
But it really floored me when he's like, Jim was a great artist on his own. I hate to correct you, but. And that was Neal. So it doesn't surprise me that Jim said that because Jim could not have been a sweeter guy.
Right.
And my favorite Jim story is when he went to San Diego finally in the 90s and all these fans like mobbed him and he had a standing ovation and he was crying because he didn't know because he was behind his draft board all that time.
Sure.
And he's like, I had no idea you people even remember me. And we're like, Jim, you're a god. Jesus.
These guys were professionals. I mean, they were true professionals.
Yes.
And they had no real connection. I mean, the fandom was at its infancy back then. Even in the 70s, fandom was pretty much at its infancy, even though I think fandom kind of started in the 60s, and it was, the fanzines that were coming out, Alter Ego and Batmania. Batmania was, a huge influence on changing Batman, changing Schwartz's trajectory of the character, because a lot of the stuff and a lot of the criticism of Bob Kane and the recognition that needed to happen for Bill Finger. I don't want to digress too much, but
That's cool.
Neal giving Aparo that credit doesn't surprise me, because Neal was the kind of person who always wanted the artists to always get their due. It was important to him, and the work that he did. He tried to form, the ACBA, which was the original comic book union, which he tried to form, and what he did for Simon and Schuster.
Yeah, Siegel.
I mean, Jerry Siegel. I mean, for Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. I mean, Neal was. I think he would gladly take a back seat to the older artists. I think he had a rivalry with some like Jim Steranko. I think there was a friendly rivalry going on between them, and maybe a friendly rivalry between some other artists of his age. But guys who are older than him, I think he always wanted to take a back seat too, and make sure they gave that credit. See, I noticed with Aparo, and I loved his stuff, but I loved his earlier Batman stuff even more. I think, and that's the stuff that was influenced by Adams in the early 70s. So I'm talking about his early Brave and the Bold stuff and his detective work that he did for Detective Comics under Archie Goodwin. That was I wrote about Archie Goodwin because I don't think it gets enough credit. What Archie Goodwin did in Detective Comics, it was 1 year, and it was shocking that, I didn't think about it then, but in my research and thinking about it, how Julius Schwartz wasn't, for 1 year, he was not the editor of Detective Comics. 1974, 70, for all of 74, I believe. This is maybe the end of 73 to 74, all through 74. Archie Goodwin was the editor. And of course, Archie Goodwin, I mean, arguably people talk about him as being the greatest editor in the history of comics. I know it's argued, but he is considered one of the greatest. And he came over from Warren, and he had worked on Creepy and Eerie. And his run on Detective is pretty amazing. I mean, not just the Batman stories, but we're talking about Manhunter and the stuff he did with Walt Simonson on Manhunter. Which won all kinds of awards. The ACBA, which was the union, was the one who gave out the awards, and
the Shazam Awards, ironically.
Shazam Awards, exactly. And Manhunter swept everything. I mean, Archie swept. He was best writer. Simonson was best artist.
Yeah.
Manhunter was the best continuing story.
Walter's sick of talking to me about Manhunter. I always give it up to Walter for what a brilliant design. And a wonderful story, and that Batman kind of was woven in at the end of that epic was pretty amazing.
Right, exactly. And what people don't know, unless you were buying the comics, at least like I was, I'm old enough that I bought these comics off the stands. I was a kid.
Yep.
That Manhunter was like, where the hell did this come from? It was like, this was unlike anything DC was doing.
It had the whole conspiracy with the villains. the secret society and everything. And Paul Kirk, Manhunter, was a Golden Age hero
Right.
that they just took and redesigned. And again, he had these awesome, like 40s Joan Crawford shoulders on his costume, and his mask wasn't a traditional domino mask. And it just was this, like you said, it was so different. Him and I forget who the it was Aparo again. I was gonna say Aparo's Aquaman and Aparo's Spectre. I know you're a massive fan of.
Huge fan of that, of the Fleischer Aparo Spectre, which was I like to think of as like if EC Comics had ever done a superhero series, it would be that particular version of the Spectre.
Absolutely, man. No, weird. It was in Adventure Comics, and when Spectre headlined the title, it became Weird Adventure Comics.
Exactly.
I mean, you know that they made one of those DC showcase shorts, and Steve Niles wrote it, the man from behind 30 Days of Night and other great comics. And it's literally like a 10 or 12, a 12 or 15 minute Spectre short. And it absolutely evokes the feeling of 70s Spectre. And you had Jim Corrigan, who in his human guise was a police detective, but by night, when much like the first Daredevil movie, when you weren't satisfied by the cops or whatever, making sure that the criminal paid, the Spectre showed up and in very
he made them pay. He made them pay in all kinds of like horrible, gory ways. It was
graphically.
It was great stuff. And you know, as a kid, I'm like, that's 74, so it's like I'm like 11 years old and I'm reading this stuff, and it's like, wow, you know, that's it's a great time. 74 also, you know, was the Goodwin Batman and Manhunter, and you know, you're talking about Neal kind of at the tail end. You know, Moon of the Wolf was the last Batman official Batman story he did at that time for DC.
But also, you know, his work on Green Lantern, Green Arrow, obviously the hard
exactly. You know, and it's like it's funny. I've written a few things about Green Lantern, Green Arrow for back issue, and in this new issue, Michael Urey does a really nice thing about the
hold on,
I should show it.
Put it up, and yeah, all right, I'm zooming in on you.
So Michael does a really nice, like a 50-year.
Oh, there you go.
50-year, you know, kind of celebration of Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and
there's the old gentleman that like calls out Green Lantern and goes, "Yeah, I heard you took care of the purple skins and the orange skins. You ever think of doing anything for the black skins here?" And Green Lantern is like, "I'm sorry," and it kind of drives him and Ollie to kind of in a much more PG, easy readers, easy writer.
It is very much like Easy Rider. And what I ended up writing it was a lot of fun to write this piece. Michael asked me to, he said, go through Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and can you write about the real events that related to each of the stories? Because so, you know, I'm writing about SDS, I'm writing about the Weathermen, I'm writing about, you know, Charles Manson, you know, about the Jesus freaks that were going that was going on, you know, in Godspell, and you know, all that stuff, you know, and because that was right in Denny's wheelhouse, you know, because Denny was very political, and Denny was very much a liberal, and he was a pacifist, and
an activist journalist as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
really,
he was.
Really got his hands dirty and really hit, you know, poverty and other street level issues as a journalist, and brought all that to Batman. And Neal was, you know, very complicit and very, very much.
Definitely. They actually went out. They went and toured like with the cops, like the heroin houses in New York City. You know, that was going on when they did the heroin stories, the 2 issues.
Yeah, Speedy's addiction to heroin, absolutely.
Right.
Green Arrow and Green
Lantern. You know what? You know what's interesting is the fact that it got canceled. You know, and. You know, and you read because there's a statement of ownership in every magazine. There's a statement of ownership once a year, you know, or
yes,
you know, at least once a year, and basically what it is it shows you. It has to show you the sales. And it's like the sales for Green Lantern, Green Arrow were pretty damn good.
Yes,
And
they
it's
were.
like, I think that's a pile of shit. That it got canceled. It got canceled for the sales.
No, it was too controversial.
It was too controversial, and it could have also been that Neal had a problem keeping up with the deadlines, because that was something that Neal look at his drawings, look at the way he drew. I mean, it's like you could see why he would have a hard time keeping up with the deadlines, but he did. I mean that book, I don't remember it being that late, and it came out. It was a bi-monthly, I think.
It's either a bi-monthly or 8 times a year. Some issues were 8 times
and DC did that a lot. They had a lot of books were 8 times a year. I think Batman was 8 times a year.
Could have been. Well, and also Neal Speed, one of his first jobs, and I don't have any images to show everybody, but I love talking to him about that. He drew Jerry Lewis comics and did it in a cartoonish, non-realistic way, the style that everyone is used to when they think of Neal Adams. And one of the reasons why was he could crank that book out really fast at a Jack Kirby sort of speed and just make a shit ton more money doing Jerry Lewis and stuff.
Right.
So it was interesting. And it's so funny because Neal in the 60s, perhaps Steranko as well, but I definitely know Neal was told this, and Frank Miller was told this in the late 70s. What are you doing in comic books? Comics are dying. In both of those cases, they had the same conversation with older.
And here's the thing about Neal. When he came into DC, he said, "What's your worst selling book?" He did the same when he went to Marvel and he took over the X-Men. The X-Men was the worst selling comic book out by Marvel, and he has this great run with Roy Thomas and Neal, and I mean, that was it. Didn't save the book. I mean, the book eventually went to all reprints until Len Wein and Dave Cockrum took it over, in 1975, maybe, or something. Anyways, I think it was 75. Yeah, Giant Size X-Men #1 at 75.
Absolutely.
But that was Neal's thought. He wanted to take the worst character, and so he did that with Dead Man.
Yes.
He did Dead Man, which was like a something going nowhere, and he made it. It was the writer was
Arnold Drake.
Arnold Drake, right? The great science fiction writer, who was a great science fiction writer.
The man behind the Doom Patrol, which you could argue was DC's X-Men back in the day, especially when
Doom Patrol, but he also wrote science fiction novels. He was a science fiction writer, and so the Strange Adventures, that run in Strange Adventures of Dead Man, it's just it's phenomenal. I mean, you can go on and on about Neal. I mean, his legacy is unbelievable, and his influence is so widespread. So what I ended up doing when I interviewed him was I did the interview for myself, basically, because what I did was Batman was my favorite character. Neal was my favorite artist. And basically what I did was I looked and read through all of the Brave and the Bolds, all the detectives he did, and all the Batman issues that he did. And I basically wrote down all the questions that I wanted answered about those. And Neal and I go through from that first Brave and the Bold Batman team up between Dead Man and Batman, which was, God, what number was that? Can't remember, 94 or something. Anyways, that first team up, and all the way until Moon of the Wolf, which was that last Batman comic that he did, and it ended up being like the last regular comic for National that he did. He went on to do Superman versus Muhammad Ali, but that was like Treasury Edition,
Right. No, it wasn't a monthly, no. And in fact, at least from a cover standpoint, the cover started with Joe Kubert and then went to Neal. And in fact, you can find Joe's version of that iconic cover of Superman and Ali.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Joe Kubert was the original artist. He was going to do it. And then Neal took over. And then, Denny was originally going to write the story. What ended up happening was like he wrote a rough script. Neal hated it. And Neal ended up writing it. So that's, for the most part, Superman versus Muhammad Ali is written by Neal.
I meant to. I have a print of this late '70s comic book movie that I think was an episode of a Canadian TV show called Behind the Scene. Jonathan Winter is narrating, and you see they recreated it for the TV show, but you see a story session with Julie Schwartz, Denny O'Neil, and Neal.
It's on
And
YouTube. Yes, I've seen it.
It's on YouTube. Yes, some asshole put a time code on it and goes, "I own this," and it's like, no, you don't.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, you don't. So yeah, if you see a version with the full 20 minutes or whatever, there's a time code. Yeah, that guy. I have it in private rooms because Trevor Von Eeden is on that, and Mike Gold is on that, and John Romita Jr. when he's a kid. I mean, all these guys from 1978 and 79 when they shot this thing, and they had never seen the show. So I sent it to Trevor, and I've shown it at conventions on my phone to Johnny Jr. and Frank Giacoya is doing a cover, and Trevor Von Eden's doing the first cover for Black Lightning, and getting direction from the DC editor Jack C. Harris. And no, it's great. I mean, it's great, man. It's like your high school, yearbook or whatever for these guys. And and it was so great kind of going, all right, who's this? Who's that? Asking Neal, asking Denny, asking Walt Simonson for some of the Marvel people. Stan and Archie are doing a session looking over potential covers for the Human Fly. Remember that character from the 70s?
Of course, sure.
Yeah. It's
Frank Robbins. Frank Robbins, I think, did some of the issues for that.
I think you are correct. Absolutely. No, man, it was a great time. The Bronze Age is there's a lot of goofy shit in the Bronze Age, but there's a lot of gems. You just have to find them. You got to look for them.
Even the goofy stuff is fun and good. Is good stuff. Speaking of Frank Robbins, he not only wrote Batman, but he drew several issues in Detective. And I remember as a kid, I loved it. I loved his stuff. I thought it was really cool. And I remember my friends and also reading in fanzines and such. It's like they hated Frank Robbins' work.
Well, his faces were weird. At least to a child.
Because Neal had dominated the world so much at that time.
Yes.
I mean, and there were so many people copying. Rich Buckler was copying. Mike Nasser was copying. You had all these people, who were like aping Neal, and it's like I said, I don't think Aparo aped Neal. I think he was influenced by Neal. I think his Batman was heavily influenced by Neal. Irv Novick. If you look at Irv Novick, his stuff before Neal came along with Batman, and then you look at his stuff after. I mean, granted, I think Dick Giordano inking helped. However, it's still, you can see the influence of Neal there.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that Robin's stuff, which I loved and still love, was such a departure from anything that was done about Batman. Because at that time, you had the main Batman artists were Adams, Aparo, and Novick. Bob Brown did some Batman also.
Bob Brown, absolutely.
Dick Giordano did some penciling also.
Right, and did a lot of the finishes for those guys to give it
exactly. And so you've got all those guys, and they have a specific look, and they're all kind of influenced in some way or another by Neal. Yeah. And you have Frank Robbins, who's just like completely different. It's just really, and that's what makes it so great. I mean, he was, Johnny Hazard was. If people don't know about Johnny Hazard, they ought to look up Johnny Hazard. There's some book reprints of
Hermes.
Johnny Hazard.
Yeah, Hermes put out a couple nice collections of Johnny Hazard. If you love Terry and the Pirates, Milton Caniff. If you love Steve Cannon, Milton Caniff, you'll love Johnny Hazard. And that's really the apex of Frank Robbins' art. I mean, it's really a virtuoso comic strip. And again, I loved his DC and Marvel stuff, and it was weird because actually, I think as a kid, I'm like, I don't know if I like this, but in the back of my head, I kept buying the issues, and it's like I can't look away. And now, especially after reading Johnny Hazard, I really, really appreciate 70s DC and Marvel Frank Robbins output. And
I think a lot of people are like that. I think he grew, on people, because I think, again, at that time, it was such a departure from anything that was going on. And even in Captain America, and I was a Marvel freak in the 70s at this time, Spider-Man, and especially and Captain America and the X-Men. And so Captain America, that was the time with the Secret Empire that,
Right.
when Englehart was doing Secret Empire, and Sal Buscema, who was fantastic on Captain America. And you had Sal Buscema, and then all of a sudden Frank Robinson's doing several issues, and you want to talk about like a departure.
Yes.
You go from, Sal Buscema to Frank Robbins, and I liked it, but I know that a lot of people didn't. And again, like John, like you're saying, I think a lot of people now have a deep appreciation for Robbins.
Well, and it's so sad because Sal is a great artist, and he's got, just like his older brother, John, that classic Marvel style. And it happened again in the 80s when Sal was doing the New Mutants, and then they turned it over to Sienkiewicz. And God, I remember those Amazing Hero letter bags where people were like, who the fuck is this? And why the hell is he ruining New Mutants? And obviously now
I loved it because I loved what he was doing on Moon Knight. See, he if you read Moon Knight the way I did from issue 1, you saw this progression of this artist who started out aping Neal Adams. He admits it. I mean, he was copying Neal. He was heavily influenced. He was copying Neal Adams.
Absolutely.
All of a sudden, and I think it's trying to remember what issue it was, but it's like all of a sudden it turns into something completely different, and something that's like fine art. It's and I was in art school at the time, so it was like I'm going like, what is this? This is amazing what he's doing, and to think it went from this to this. And of course, Electra Assassin, he's getting into collage and paint and
almost impressionist painting. Yes, and also got his Daredevil graphic novel.
The Daredevil is Love and War, right?
Love and War, yes, with the Kingpin and
Frank Miller wrote, like Electra Assassin. I mean, they were a very good team.
Well, Vanessa in the Daredevil story makes Wilson Fisk, it's like, all right, you got till midnight to get all this criminal activity out of you, and if you don't, then I'm leaving you. And he's got to like get Daredevil in the next 24 hours, or I'll never get him.
It's phenomenal. It's like must reading. For me, I'm a big Miller fan because he came at a time when it was like I was not losing my interest in comics, but it was like there was nothing exciting for me, and it's like his Daredevil just revived my love of the medium. And I still think, for me, my favorite work of his is his run on Daredevil, that original run on Daredevil. And then, and also, Born Again, it's fantastic, but that he didn't draw that, you got Mazzucchelli, who's
Kelly, absolutely. Yeah.
But that original run of Daredevil is phenomenal. I mean, it's true comics more.
I'll let everyone know because it's in the works, and I'm so relieved. But Frank's representative, Selene Thomas, has been incredibly kind. I helped them out a little bit with the making of this new Frank Miller documentary. And at some point this summer, I will have Frank finally on Word Balloon.
Oh, good.
I can't, because I feel the same way, man. And again, another guy that Neal influenced, and Frank had many skull sessions at Continuity with Neal and everything.
Oh yeah, I mean, Neal tore him apart. I mean, people don't, he came into Neal and showed his stuff, and Neal was the kind of person, he kind of tested your mettle, and it's like you either come here and it's like, I'm going to tell you the truth, and I can rip you a new one about
Absolutely.
your art.
Yeah.
And it's like, come back. If you come back and show me improvement, and you keep coming back and you keep getting better, and that's basically what Miller was, and I'm sure other artists, but that's the
Steranko is like that. Steranko is very much like that.
Steranko, yeah. Jim was.
He did it. Mike, he did it to a good friend of mine, and I don't feel bad telling this story out of school. My friend Doug Klauba, and he loved Jim. And he sent him, and in fact, you would love a lot of what Doug does, because he does a lot of great 40s detective noir style paintings and stuff. And Steranko just like Why is this? You got the gun firing in the rain. It's raining. The gun wouldn't be able to fire. Blah blah blah. And Doug was just like, "Oh man, he tore me a new one." And I'm like, Doug, read between the lines. He loves you. He's giving you hard love, tough love, because he knows you can achieve this stuff, and he's just being hypercritical to only make you better.
And he wants to see if you can handle it, if you can take it.
Yep.
And
Doug understood.
He's testing your will, and it's like, can you come back and improve and get better?
Yeah, man.
So I know that Frank talks about like how important Neal was to his work.
So let's shift back to you though, and some of these great back issue covers. First of all, look at this, the Demon, everybody. Oof. So is that you aping Kirby, or is
no? That's Kirby art that was found. That was like, I think it was not published. And what I'm basically doing is creating a Bronze Age comic book cover for this. Designing a Bronze Age cover. Creating a new logo for back issue. And what's been great working for Tomorrows, and I've been working for Tomorrows for a long time. I did the Batcave Companion, and I've designed other books and stuff for them. But being able to, but Michael allowing me to have this freedom to do these covers, like this one for the Teen Titans.
That's awesome.
This was the 40th anniversary of the Teen Titans. So it's basically, it's like, Michael gives me, the basic art, and he said, just do whatever you want. So, this issue, and I think I may have sent you, this is the Batman.
Yes.
So for that one, that was a lot of fun. It was just like creating and designing this, Tim Burton themed, cover. And then I ended up interviewing Sam Hamm for that, because Sam and I are good friends.
Oh, that's great. I'm gonna have to bug you to get Sam on Word Balloon. Go on.
Oh, yeah, Sam's great. And we became friends through the Film Noir Foundation. So he's from the Bay Area, and he would go to the festivals. And so he saw all my work on Noir City Magazine and all the programs and things that I've done for the Film Noir Foundation. So we became friends and love of film noir. And so I interviewed him about everything that was involved with writing, doing the screenplay for Burton, his meetings with Burton, what got cut out and stuff. It's a very good issue. There's a lot of contributors. As you can see, that Billy D. Williams is interviewed, and Michael O'Sullivan is interviewed, and there's stuff about the Denny O'Neil and Jerry Ordway, that great adaptation that they did.
I've had many conversations.
Quickly, I want to just talk about Jerry Ordway. It was like, he's one of my favorite artists.
Well, and
he is the great throwback to Murphy Anderson and Kurt Swan, and even more. And also, I always loved, besides his run on Superman, it's just so phenomenal. It's so great. God. I always loved
Shazam and
Shazam, absolutely. He wrote all those stories. I wish he had drawn all those stories, but he couldn't. I mean, it's just like, you can only do so much. But Jerry also, anytime Jerry got a chance to do Batman, it was rare. It's like Batman would have a cameo in Adventures of Superman, or Batman would be in what was the name of the series that he did with the JSA, with the Earth 2 characters?
The All-Star Squadron.
All-Star Squadron. So Batman would be in that every now and then. And it's like, I always loved, Jerry's Batman, because it was a mixture of Dick Sprang, Kurt Swan, and Murphy Anderson, but with a Jerry Ordway spin on it. So it was great. So anyway,
Jerry's
quickly do a shout out to Jerry Ordway, because
Jerry's going to be at Terrificon. I always love seeing him. I'm sure I hope to talk to him before then. I got about 7 weeks before the show, so I'm looking forward to that. No, he's great. Well, speaking of Superman, of course, your own cover here. Is that a Gary Frank?
Yes. So again, it's like Michael just saying, it's like, hey, here's the art. do something with it. And this is going to be a Superman movie theme. So
yeah, which very much evokes the treasury-sized DC comic that promoted.
right. That was a stat. I got that as a kid. That was like a very different Treasury edition. But, it wasn't a comic book. It was just basically a program, almost like a movie program. It was like a large movie program.
I just put out again today my interview with Stacey Souther, who made this great documentary about Valerie Perrine, Miss Tessmacher. And they just played it again, or actually, I think they played it for the first time on
TCM
on Saturday night. And it's heartbreaking because of what Valerie is going through. And it hasn't gotten better, obviously. Yeah, really tough Parkinson's and very degenerative disease. And the poor thing can't talk anymore. Thank God they got her on film before it got really bad. It's rough. And man, she's great in Superman, and obviously such a big movie. Unfortunately, she follows it up with Can't Stop the Music, the infamous Village People movie with Bruce Jenner, when he was Bruce Jenner. And it's a shame because she really was on a roll in the early 70s with a lot of.
She was in Lenny. She was in Lenny.
Waterhouse 5, even W.C. Fields and Me. She was, and I mean, for Lenny, she got an Academy Award nomination. And so it's really a shame that, she continued to work well into the 2000s until she physically couldn't work. She was on that great boxing FX series, Lights Out.
I never saw that.
Oh, man, it's about a heavyweight champion, and she played the champ's mother and Stacy Keach's estranged wife. And they had
Stacy Keach, great, from Fat City.
And of course, Mike Hammer on TV's Mike Hammer and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Stacey Keach's a great actor. I mean, he's
absolutely.
Things, but thinking about boxing, that's the first.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's why he was cast.
Interestingly, I don't know if you knew this, but John Huston's first choice for that role. First of all, unbelievable book. Maybe the greatest novel, maybe the greatest piece of fiction about boxing ever. Harder They Fall is great, but it's about the outside of boxing. But Fat City is about the boxers,
fighters. Yeah.
And
who was Houston's first choice?
Marlon Brando.
There you go. Well, and again, as a teaser of where we're going to go with this and stuff, you wanted to talk about some of these fantastic. Jim. Why am I blanking now?
Jim Warren. Jim Warren.
He's known more for Creepy Eerie and Famous Monsters.
Yeah, what you were just showing was Basil Gogos' painting of Brando from one of Warren. Warren had a lot of different magazines, and he did like 2 Western magazines. So he had this one. It was about movies and TV, and it was about One-Eyed Jacks. It was maybe the only magazine. No, I shouldn't say that. Life magazine had Brando on the cover for One-Eyed Jacks. But anyway, just as a side, One-Eyed Jacks, one of the greatest Westerns ever made. Marlon Brando directed it, and it doesn't get nearly enough credit. Buy the Criterion Blu-ray. It's phenomenal.
I agree, and I know how much of a Brando fan you are. I am a Warren Publishing fan, and of course, more famous for Famous Monsters of Filmland.
Yeah, and also, if you're talking about Warren, please read this book.
Well, it's hard to get unless Fantagraphics reissued the book because they're run.
Too bad.
I'm so glad you have it to show. I bought it right away as well.
So did I.
It's a brilliant. Was it Bill Shelley? It was Bill Shelley. Of course it was.
Yeah, Bill Shelley wrote it. Bill Shelley? We were talking about the early days of fandom, and Bill Shelley was was a major part of fandom, comic book fandom in the 60s.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to him about his Otto Binder book, and I had every intention of following up with more interviews. And sadly, we lost Bill.
Yeah, Bill. I was shocked when Bill died. I was just so upset and shocked that he passed away because he did a lot for Tomorrows also.
Yes.
And but that book about Warren is amazing because if you were a fan of the Warren magazines, and I was, Famous Monsters and Creepy Eerie, The Spirit too. That
Yeah.
was my introduction to Will Eisner.
Yes,
Was
me too.
Warren's version of The Spirit, and what was so cool about those Spirit comics. And I'm going to go grab one.
Sure, please do, because I didn't grab any covers to show here on the screen. This is great. No, Warren was amazing. We've got more short-lived magazines to show that Mike wanted us to.
Yeah, so this was the first issue,
right? Look at that.
And so this was the second issue. Now, what's interesting is that these issues. This is actually my favorite cover.
Yes,
and
I have that.
Boy, too bad this got the light. Unfortunate.
No problem, man.
Richard Corbin colored this. He painted.
Wow.
This. And what's really cool about The Spirit and what they were doing with the first maybe 5 issues was that Warren and Eisner agreed to create a color section inside.
Yes.
So you had this color, one story in color, colored by the great Richard Corbin.
Yeah. And ironically, it worked. And as a noir aficionado, and the noir influence that Eisner put in so many Spirit stories and stuff, these color sections still work.
Oh yeah,
what I mean?
You're talking about the Warren color sections. They're amazing. And as a kid, now this is again 74. We keep going back to the year of 74, which was a phenomenal year. And it's like, again, I'm like 11 years old, and I'm reading this. And I'm really taken aback by the coloring that Corbin did, because you didn't really see anything like this in comics, because all comics were newsprint. So you're getting this glossy color. And Richard Corbin had his own style. I mean, his paint, the way he painted, of course, was, distinct. And the way he colored was really distinct. So it really caught my attention as a kid, and it's really what got me into The Spirit. And what ended up happening is when I was working for Russ Cochran for Comic Book Marketplace, he asked me who I wanted to. He would always ask me who I wanted to interview, and one of the people was Will Eisner, and I ended up getting to talk on the phone for like 2 hours to Will Eisner all about The Spirit. And it was one of his last interviews, because he died. He died about like a month or 2 after I interviewed him.
Do you still have the tape of it?
I do not. I have the interview. I still have the interview, but I don't have the tape.
No, that's
fine.
I don't
think I do. Maybe somewhere hidden away.
2001, the University of Chicago had a humanities weekend where they really focused on comics. And Neal Gaiman interviewed Will Eisner on stage, and I saw it live. And the great thing was, because it was a university setting, it was very casual that after their talk, they were just in the lobby of the auditorium, 300-seat auditorium, and were just there for anyone to talk to. So, and this was a couple of years before I was doing Word Balloon. So I brought several of my Warren Spirit magazines for him to autograph.
Oh,
and he's like, I haven't seen these in a while. These are great. And the oxidized, I don't think they were originally peach-colored paper, but I guess the oxygen maybe made them turn peach-colored, the interior.
You're talking about the color sections?
Well, no, just the print regular sections of the book, like the black and white pages. Again, maybe the copies I got, were in a weird basement.
Yeah, they I mean, like all the Warren stuff, it's kind of got that off-white kind of yellowish look, but he was, it was great interviewing Will Eisner. It was amazing.
Sure.
I wanted to talk to him, specifically being Jewish. I wanted to talk to him about that Jewish experience, and the Jewish experience of being a comic book artist and what he dealt with, and talk about New York and talk about The Spirit. But back to Warren, just a fascinating, before I even read Shelley's book, a fascinating, strange guy who's just like, I always wanted to know more about him. I mean, I had heard, he kind of like collapsed the Warren Empire, went to Israel to go fight for Israel. He was it was just there were all these strange stories about him, and to finally read Shelley's book, which is really well researched and really well written, was great. And as far as Famous Monsters goes, you want to talk about egos? Is like Forrest Ackerman had like the biggest ego. I mean,
Sure.
I know I'm probably like gonna get on people's, if anybody's listening, and they're gonna get on my bad side, and it's like the person really behind Famous Monsters was Warren. I mean, he's the guy who started. He's the guy who created it. And let's face it, he's also the guy who was behind the look. He hired Basil Gogos. He got the covers going. It was him who told Gogos what to paint and what to do. Ackerman had nothing to do with that. And it was Warren who, kind of drove that engine for Famous Monsters. The look and the design, those were his guys who were doing the art direction and doing the design of the interiors, the lettering, the way the lettering looked. It's like, Jim Warren was also a graphic designer too. So he more than Ackerman loved to take credit for just about anything and everything. And let's face it, when you talk about the inside of FM and how it was written, I mean, it was jokes. And who read FM? Did anybody read FM? You looked at the pictures. You mainly looked at the photographs and read the captions. And most of the captions were these dopey captions that Ackerman wrote.
But I mean, even his Captain, I forget the name of his
Captain Company.
Captain Company, yes, where that was all the merch, basically like those old ads in Silver and Bronze Age comics for Onion Gum and things like that. Jim had masks of Frankenstein and then the Wolfman and the Mummy and everything else, and then he'd also sell.
He sold the paperbacks. He sold great paperbacks. He sold records.
I was going to say he sold albums of old time radio and stuff.
We were talking about Batman 30s to the 70s. He was selling books like that. He was selling Dick Tracy, collections and things like that. I mean, it was almost as fun looking at the ads, the back part of Captain Company, and seeing all the stuff that was for sale.
Absolutely.
So
wasn't it
Jim Warren is the person who needs to get the credit for Famous
Monsters. I agree.
It
didn't Forey Ackerman have like all the movie stills and stuff that they used?
He had a lot of the stills. He did. Ackerman, was a collector, and so he had a lot of the stills. But but those would go. A lot of that stuff would go to Warren, who would then give it to the graphic designers, who would go ahead and scan it and so forth as they were.
Well, here's a collection of some of Basil's other.
And Gogos was amazing. I mean, he was a fantastic artist.
Oh yeah, did you ever have a chance to meet him?
I did. I actually went to the Famous Monsters convention reunion in Washington, D.C. in 1993 when they relaunched Famous Monsters. And so Gogos was a guest. Ray Bradbury. That's how I got to meet Ray Bradbury. Ray Harryhausen.
Yes.
It was the second time I got to meet Ray Harryhausen. The first time I met Ray Harryhausen and I was a fan as a kid of Harryhausen's films.
Of course.
I was in college in Atlanta, and the what was called the Atlanta Fantasy Fair at the time. He was a guest. There was nobody there talking to him. Nobody at his table. And Walt Simonson was at that convention. I got to meet Walt and talk to him. And but anyways, I got to meet him and sign his autograph. And I saw in 1980. The Museum of Modern Art had an exhibition of Harryhausen's models.
Oh, wow.
And I was in New York City for that. And I got to see that. I was like 16 years old, and I got to see that. And I got to meet him then. So I'd met him a few times. So Gogos was a guest at this relaunch. And basically what it was is the 200th issue of Famous Monsters. And this guy had bought the rights to Famous Monsters, and he was redoing it. A lot of controversy with that. Guy was an asshole. He ended up ripping off Ackerman, but all that said, the convention was amazing. What's his name? My brother and I met the I can't think. His name is the American Werewolf in London director, Animal House director.
Landis, yeah, John
Landis. So we met John Landis.
Sure.
And
big monster.
It was a phenomenal convention. It was sure. Amazing. Ackerman tried to pick my wife up.
That's outstanding. Oh my God. I met the Rays, Bradbury and Harryhausen, at my first San Diego in 2006, and they were just walking around the show and incredibly approachable. And of course, I recognized them both right away. And it was like, oh my God, the two Rays, and they laughed.
And they were best friends. I mean, they were good friends with Ackerman also, but also the two Rays were best friends.
And they were genuine fans. They were just as excited about stuff as any of us would be. And that's what was so great about them. And here's these two deans of science fiction and fantasy, and could not have been sweeter. And I shook their hands and just said, I'm like, my God, thank you for all the enjoyment that I've had in my life. The other great moment like that for me was that a couple of years later at San Diego was meeting George Clayton Johnson, who of course wrote so many great Twilight Zone episodes. And
he wrote some of the best. And Richard Matheson was a guest also at this Famous Monsters.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So I would say, I Am Legend is like, to me, is like the great science fiction horror novel. But
Nightmare at 10,000 feet. I mean, my God, 30,000, whatever.
I think the best episodes, my favorite episodes, taking nothing away from Rod Serling, because he had phenomenal episodes too. But my favorites were Johnson's and Matheson's episodes.
Sure.
Long live Walter Jameson. I just rewatched that with my
that's
wife.
A great one with Kevin McCarthy. Sure.
Exactly. It's one of my all-time favorites. Speaking of Kevin McCarthy, my brother and I got to have dinner with Kevin McCarthy at a convention.
Wow.
Talk about a character. Kevin McCarthy was a real character.
Man, and just the guy, God bless him, man, went from being like B-movie leading man to wonderful character actor. He's so funny in Inner Space, the Martin Short movie with Dennis Quaid, and the guy
and he didn't take himself too seriously at all.
I believe it. That's awesome.
He had such great stories to tell, and I had to ask him about because it was like the obvious questions were to talk to him about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and my brother and I were big fans of that episode of Twilight Zone. We talked about it. That
sure.
He didn't really have a lot of memories of that. It was just like another job, I mean,
yeah,
you're talking about a guy who had I don't know if you look on IMDb, he probably has like 200 credits,
Probably. Yes. And that makes sense. I mean, literally that's something that they shot probably in a week.
Right.
And
I wanted to ask him about his friendship with Brando and his friendship with Montgomery Clift. He and Montgomery Clift were very good friends. And I wanted to talk to him about his run on Death of a Salesman, because he was in the original run of Death of a Salesman with Lee J. Cobb, that Arthur Miller. He played Biff.
I was going to say he played one of the sons, so it makes sense that he played Biff.
He was the original Biff in Death of a Salesman. So I think he was nominated for a Tony also.
It wouldn't surprise me. What a role. And I could totally see young McCarthy being capable of it. I'm throwing this up again because you mentioned Brando, but also the great thing about these Warren magazines, things like this, and like Screen Thrills, which you sent me.
So Screen Thrills was really interesting because like the Western, it was all about all of the serials. And I think I sent you, it's a book cover I did for Tomorrow's, which is all about the serials, Cliffhanger. So if you notice, when they asked me to do this, they said, "Can you design this cover for this thing about the hero serials?" It's like, oh man, I gotta do a Warren Screen Thrills cover. I'm gonna do this Warren Screen. Christopher Irvin, who's the author, was the guy who was like, oh my God, I was just thinking I wanted that. So it was like somebody appreciated it.
Outstanding, man. No, and look at it. I mean, everybody's there. Tom Taylor is Captain Marvel. Dick Purcell is Cap. Is that Spy Smasher in the bottom left?
Yes.
Very cool. And which version of Tarzan, if it is Tarzan?
It is not Tarzan. It's actually
It's not Bamba.
maybe Bamba.
Is it? Because he looks too beefy for Bamba, but I'll take your word for it if it is
I don't
Bamba.
remember. I don't remember, John, exactly. You know,
It's all right. It's all right. That's fine. No,
it's a Tarzan copy. He's a Tarzan copy.
I do want people to know that if you are just curious, and it's so great that they're up there, the Internet Archive has so many issues of Warren publishing, including a lot of these fly-by-nights that didn't make it more than 6 issues, like Western and Screen Thrills. And God, there's a science fiction magazine that he tried, all in the same vein as Famous Monsters. You know, whatever.
There's a lot of issues of Famous Monsters on there too.
What's that?
There's a lot of issues of Famous Monsters on that site.
Absolutely.
Also.
So yeah, if you want to download like PDFs or whatever format you want for your tablet, they look great on there, and they're free. They're public domain. I mean, so or whatever like tied up rights issue allows them to be up there, but they're amazing and really a great look. And there's even a couple that, much like Screen Thrills or your cliffhanger thing, really focus on the superhero output of the cliffhangers.
Yeah, in fact, I think there was one special issue that Warren did that had the Adam West Batman on it, and they had Kirk Allen Superman. It was Jim Warren trying to get in on the whole campy superhero thing in 1966, and he puts out this special issue, and it's like pictures from the Adam West Batman movie, and also from the Kirk Allen Superman, and also Shazam, the Captain Marvel, the Adventures of Captain Marvel, which is still, I think, considered the greatest superhero serial ever made.
I think it absolutely is. And I mean, really, I loved Kirk Allen as Superman and George Reeves, of course. But that Captain Marvel, no, they really, it's fantastic. And it really feels like you're reading or watching a version of Wiz Comics era Captain Marvel. And this Western magazine, and you can see by some of the other features in there beyond One-Eyed Jacks, like Bonanza, this was at the height of the television and film Western craze of the early 60s.
Right.
I was just telling a friend today that I'm like, there were like 25 primetime Westerns back in the day.
Yeah, and you had Steve McQueen in Wanted Dead or Alive. You had Clint Eastwood in Rawhide. You had Chuck Connors, and
The Rifleman. Yes,
The Rifleman. I mean, it's like like you said, there's a million of them.
There's this series that only lasts.
High Chaparral. I mean, you
I was telling my friend, I go, I think they're rerunning High Chaparral in particular because there are so many great Hispanic characters in it, and it's a nice representation. And it is one of those last early 70s great TV Westerns. But I was going to say, ironically, there was a series called The Deputy that obviously did focus on the deputy, but as a side character, and he wasn't in every episode, but he was in a lot of them, Henry Fonda is the sheriff in The Deputy, which is insane. But this was the craze. Everybody was doing Westerns.
Well, look, Barbara Stanwyck won an Emmy for The Virginian. I mean, right?
For the one, Big Valley.
Yeah, not The Virginian. For
Big Valley.
The Big Valley. Big Valley, right?
No,
so
man,
I mean, she had her second career in television on a Western show.
Absolutely. God, if he wasn't so successful being Cheyenne, Clint Walker at some point in his career should have played Superman, either on TV or film, because he was 6'7", total muscle man, had the jet black hair, almost had a spit curl, had kind of a fringe that went beyond his regular hair, and you could easily tease it into a spit curl. I mean, everybody look up a photo of Clint Walker, and it's like, why didn't this guy ever play Superman? He would have
also, what's his name from Mission Impossible?
Peter Lupus.
I don't know if he was a good enough actor to be able to pull it off, but he had the look.
He absolutely had the look. No, I saw Peter Lupus at a Beverly Garland Hotel, North Hollywood autograph show in the early 80s. I also met Les Tremayne from the Shazam TV show.
Les Tremayne, sure. I mean, Les Tremayne, besides that Shazam thing, it was like, he had like this great career, in radio and
film and TV.
Films, I mean, it was just...
He's the auctioneer in that classic scene from North by Northwest where Cary Grant's trying to get arrested and is just being an asshole and shouting out random bits.
That's right.
Would the gentleman please cooperate? And that's Les Tremayne.
I didn't want us to forget talking about two other magazines.
Please.
So Cinefantastique.
Yes.
This is one of the best issues. This was from 1988. This issue was completely dedicated. It was a double issue. It was dedicated to the great movie posters, science fiction and horror movie posters of the 50s.
Oh wow.
So full color magazine. Fred Clark was the editor, and Cinefantastique. I had a subscription to it. That's one of the great issues. They sent and they got permission from the movie studios to right on the set. Blade Runner, The Thing, they were right there. That particular issue is a double issue. Also, it's about The Thing and Blade Runner. I mean, it's like amazing. And they comprehensive reports with and then in that Thing issue, it's like you've got Mike Ploog's storyboards and illustrations and great behind the scenes photos of John Carpenter doing the directing and the entire cast, and Rob Bottin's like in-depth stuff of Rob Bottin in the studio creating all of the effects and sculpting, and interviews. They talked with Carpenter because Cinefantastique at the time was like, it was the Time magazine of genre movies. It was, they were on the set, they were right there. They talked to all the directors. They had access to all of these people because the studios and the directors, they wanted to appease and go out to the fans like myself and you, who were fans of these movies and who bought this magazine and were looking forward to this stuff. And it was just a phenomenally good magazine, really well written. Fred Clark was a really very strange person, very, in a way, like Jim Warren. He could be like Warren. He could be, he could give people their chances that they never had before. Warren was very much like that. All of those, you think about all the artists who in Creepy and Airy who got their first shot, but he could also be a dictator, and he could be an asshole, and not pay people. And there's a lot of, Fred Clark was very similar. Fred Clark gave a lot of writers, a lot of guys who wrote about movies, who would end up going on to write screenplays and such, and being directors who worked for Fred Clark. And he was known for giving these people chances, young people who never had a chance before, but he could be a real asshole. And he was a very strange person too.
Bert Sugar in Boxing Fields was kind of the same way. Not an asshole, but a guy that would give young writers a break. And I'm one of them. And in fact, I felt like I caught that tail end in the 90s of this tradition of these kinds of magazines, in the case of Boxing Illustrated. And he was great to me. I didn't make much money from my articles with Bert, but what I did always get was a free pass to any fight that I wanted.
Well, and I think, Nigel Collins, who,
our friend,
mutual friend, and who writes for my magazine, Ringside Seat, he gave, Bill Detloff his shot. He gave Eric Raskin his shot. So Nigel, when he was the editor of the Ring, gave a lot of young people their opportunity, like Bert did. The other magazine I wanted to talk about was Monster Times.
Yeah, tell me about Monster Times, man. And I've got another cover you sent over, because I missed it. It was printed on newsrag and more of a newsprint rather than a traditional slick.
It was like, if you're familiar with the way Rolling Stone was,
right,
back in the day,
right, original run
fold, exactly like Rolling Stone, a double fold tabloid,
right.
So it just like Rolling Stone. It has this cover, and then you'd open it up.
Look at that,
and it is
that Death Chip, by the way. That's skull.
This was the EC issue, and it was when Tales from the Crypt came out, the 1972 Tales from the Crypt.
Oh wow! Yeah.
from Amicus Studios from
Yes.
in Great Britain.
Yes.
So basically, so what it is
hold on. There we go. Look at that.
It's
And that's an
just
EC.
like
It's an ad.
That's
That's an ad for an
just like
EC.
Rolling Stone.
That's an ad for an EC convention that you just had there.
Right, exactly. And so this was the special EC issue, and it came out bi-weekly, just like Rolling Stone. And that issue, and you can see they talked about comics, and you can see, that's when, so 1970, I don't know if this was a 71 or 72 issue. You're talking about Conan was really hot.
Yeah.
I mean, 1970 Conan came out, and it was like all the rage in comic fandom.
Oh my God. Shout out to Barry Windsor Smith, who sadly we learned this
he had a stroke.
Yeah, so
like right after his birthday, and he was in intensive care for
hoping he makes a recovery. Great guy.
I mean, because for me, Barry Smith is the ultimate Conan artist. I mean, I know he's done much more than that. Monsters is a phenomenal book, and he did, of course, Weapon X, but for me, when I think of Conan, and I was the right age, so I mean, 1971 is when I was really into comics, and he was doing Conan, and Red Nails, Red Nails is an epic. I mean, it's
great graphic
novel. It's the greatest Conan comic book ever created, and it was black and white. It was originally in Savage Tales, but
right. Well, and that's honestly, man, I didn't grab any magazine covers of Marvel's black and white era. But you had that great run of Planet of the Apes. You had the Hulk magazine that was.
You did Doc Savage also.
Doc Savage was great.
They did the horror. They did the horror books. They had Dracula Lives. They had Dracula Lives. They had, I think it was called Haunt of Evil. Maybe, I don't remember. There's Monsters Unleashed.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, those were Curtis. That was the Curtis Publishing.
Right, they were the parent company at the time. Yes.
Yeah, it was that offshoot from Marvel. The
Magazine Entertainment was the umbrella company that had.
Yeah, Martin Goodman's right. That was Martin Goodman's company, right?
Right.
I loved all that. Also, over here
again, brilliant painted covers in a lot of cases.
Talking about Neal, you got this great issue of
Deadly Hands of
Kung Fu with this Bruce Lee cover by Neal.
Yes. No, I'm a massive fan of the Kung Fu magazines. You got Iron Fist stories. You got Sons of the Dragon, which had the original trinkets that eventually went to the White Tiger, both the male version and the female version that Bendis created in the early 2000s. But
and Master of Kung Fu that Doug mentioned and Paul Gulacy did, and of course I did that. The book about Paul Gulacy, The Art of Paul Gulacy. I did Spies, Vixens, and Masters of Kung Fu. That
was that Vanguard, or was that
a Vanguard book? Yeah, that was actually the first book I ever did.
Oh wow, that's cool. Paul's amazing. Paul.
Oh yeah. I mean, and my wife ended up being his colorist on Catwoman when he was.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
When Brubaker was writing it, and Paul took over the
I should tease. It'll come out on Friday. We're pre-recording on Thursday. New conversation with Ed Brubaker coming this Friday on Word Balloon.
Oh, good. Well, Brubaker's the best.
Yeah, man.
I can't wait for his new book.
Night Fever or Night Vision. I've got
Night Fever. Yeah,
it comes out this week. That's why
it comes out on Wednesday, and then already, I don't know if you're reading Friday, but Friday is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's on Marcos Martin's platform. Mm-hmm. It's a great story. Ed knows what here's the state of the obvious. Ed knows what he's doing. It's so great. Has Ed met Eddie Muller?
Oh yeah. I actually set that up for them to meet, and actually I had Eddie interview Ed and Sean Phillips when they were doing
Criminal,
the Fade Out.
Oh sure, even better.
Doing the Fade Out.
Yes.
And we did for Noir City. I convinced Eddie. I begged him. I said, we got to do a comic book noir issue. Got to do a comic book noir.
Of course,
you relented. And I said, you got to interview Ed and Sean. So it's like I hooked them up with Eddie, and that did that interview. And it's like, and actually in that I adapted some of the stuff I wrote about Batman in the 70s and how is the relationship between noir and Batman, and wrote an article in that about that. And God, what else? In that issue we also featured story about Batman Year One, and
was that when
Eddie and I did our top 10 list of the best noir comics ever.
Outstanding. Here's a bunch of your covers for Noir City, everybody.
Yeah, those are older ones. So
I know.
since then we're now.
All right, as you're digging, I'll let people look at this for a second.
All right.
And, oh my God, man!
Some of the
Gloria Graham and Robert Ryan, just David Jensen and Barry Morse from The Fugitive. So many wonderful covers here that Mike has designed for Noir City, the foundation and the magazine. All right, when you're ready.
We're now doing a print edition. So here's some of the
Bill Holden.
Really nice story about William Holden. And this was we ended up interviewing Guillermo del Toro for about his new version of Nightmare Alley, and we talked about the old version of Nightmare Alley. So I did this Nightmare Alley cover.
Absolutely.
But I designed the whole issue.
Mike, I wanted to ask you because hold on, I'm going to zoom in on this one.
This was Gloria Graham.
Yeah, Gloria Graham.
So Dana Delaney wrote this piece about Gloria Graham's career because Gloria Graham was a big influence on Dana, and so she was a guest on Eddie's show,
Noir Alley,
and they brought the issue on, and they talked about the issue, and they talked about her story, and Dana introduced a couple of Gloria Graham's movies.
Excellent.
And,
Mike, I wanted to ask as you're digging through.
You do modern noir?
Stand by. Yeah, I wanted to. All right, there you go. Last Seduction, of course, Linda Fiorentino. And then
that's Veronica Lake.
Oh, it's Veronica Lake. That's great.
100th anniversary.
Man, I wanted to ask Mike because someone was asking me online, as far as TV noir from and I'll get the obvious ones, and I want you to dig and tell me if there are more. But like Peter Gunn, the Craig Stevens Show, Johnny Staccato, which obviously
Johnny Staccato. We featured a story about Johnny Staccato. We actually did I think you had it up there. It's one of the covers. I did it like a TV guide, like an old TV guide cover. Yeah, there it is. The one with The Fugitive.
With Jansen with David Jansen and Barry Morse in the bottom row.
Yeah, so I designed that cover like an old TV guide. But anyways, we did a TV noir issue. And
okay.
So Imogen Smith, who is actually now the editor in chief of the magazine, she took over with this past issue. She wrote a really great piece about The Fugitive.
So, all right, other than those three, and I'm trying to think if he had asked me about another one. Well, I told him, even though it's more cloak and dagger, that I felt Patrick McGowan's Secret Agent evoked kind of a noirish style. But are there other hardcore? I mean, I'm glad you mentioned The Fugitive and certainly the black and white episodes. As it got into color, that's kind of where it's hard to do shadows and color and everything. You're almost cheating.
Yeah, I mean, I think noir is. I think there's more to noir than just being maybe black and white. I mean, there's.
Well, you're right.
You're talking about The Last Seduction right there. I mean, neo noir and such.
But what other TV shows would you call noir TV shows?
Of old stuff?
Yeah.
Boy,
yeah, and I mean, if you can't think of
it, Naked City probably.
Of course,
is probably the biggest, main example of it.
Agreed.
It wasn't. It was a series, but it was individual stories.
Yeah, it was an anthology. I mean, they had the Paul Burke and even James Franciscus in the early seasons of the cops that were kind of the continuing thread, but really the stories. It was an anthology story. Yeah. I mean, Route 66 a little too sunny, I think, for it to be a noir.
Yeah. I need to look up the TOC for for that issue that we were talking about.
Can we still purchase those issues? The old
Those issues that you showed are digital, so you can all the print issues are available through Amazon, and also available. Sometimes they're available at the festivals. We just finished our festival in Boston, and you can go to noircitymag.com, and you can get for $5.99 each the digital versions of these. So I'm looking at the TOC. So Perry Mason, Alan Rhodey wrote about Perry Mason and its relation to noir. Vince Keenan, who's a very good friend of mine and who was the editor of the magazine, he wrote about the HBO Lovecraft films that came out in the 90s.
Sure.
And
even that Marlowe British produced TV show of the 80s that was on HBO with Powers Booth, I think, is Philip Marlowe. I think they were.
I like that. That was good.
Yeah. Almost as good as the Mitchum 70s Marlowe movies, I think.
And my brother wrote a good piece talking about the noir episodes of Twilight Zone and the noir episodes of Thriller, of Boris Karloff's.
Yes.
Thriller is one of the great series that is kind of lost. That
it's overlooked. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely overlooked. I mean, it most of the noir episodes were in the first season, and then in the second season, it got into horror. And there's some really pretty scary, really good, horror stuff on Thriller in that second season. Adaptations of Matheson stuff, also Robert Bloch. So I don't even know where you could even stream
Thriller currently. Neither do I, man. I know MeTV or one of those antenna TVs was showing it a couple of years ago. I'm not sure now. Would you consider the first season of Outer Limits, even though it was sci-fi? I mean, Conrad Hall, the great cinematographer.
A great series. I think so. It's definitely got that feeling. I mean, I think about the one. What was it called? It was the one about the assassination. It was actually it came out around the time of Kennedy's assassination. And
I know what you're talking about. It was in the first season. Yes.
That was a pretty noir
something with dragon in the name of it, because it was
Was it Hour of the Dragon?
Might have been, but yeah, it was a Chinese conspiracy to replace a president with a duplicate or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they were science fiction, and they could be pretty disturbing for their time.
Oh God, yeah.
No, think about Corpus Earthling. I don't know if you remember that one.
I don't, but by title,
they're like they become like people become zombies, and they're
yes,
the Zanti Misfits, of course, is one of the most famous ones.
Yes,
with Bruce Dern.
Oh no, Gabe Hardman and I, we went through and Ian Brill and others. We went through both seasons of Outer Limits. We were only going to do the first one because Gabe, being a great storyboard guy, cinematographer, and director, was like, it's all about Conrad Hall. And then he's like, well, if we did the first season, we got to do the second season. So we did. It was only like 50 episodes or whatever. But we had a blast. We did it during COVID.
It was way ahead of its time.
Yes.
And of course, I think people mainly know the Outer Limits for the fact that it was an influence on Watchmen, and
Architects of Fear. Yes.
Architects of Fear, which is a great episode, but
yes.
But there's a lot of really good episodes. There's some that are it could be hit and miss, like the Twilight Zone. It was hit and miss, but there are some episodes that are just phenomenal.
The one where Lando plays an alien who can project the guise of being a human being is a very cool, atmospheric episode. And man, they really scrubbed the old prints and really have great new prints of that series.
Yeah, I'd love to get the Blu-ray set for that. And I think getting also the DVD. I don't know if there's a Blu-ray. I'm sure there's a Blu-ray release of Thriller. It's probably the only way to see Thriller. You know, speaking of physical media, it's the way to watch movies now because you know what happened with French Connection.
Tell them.
So, so Disney cut out, censored the French Connection. They censored the N-word out of the French Connection, a scene that Popeye Doyle from Gene Hackman is in, which is just part of the vernacular of the character, part of New York in the 1970s. You know, and if you're going to start doing that censoring there, you're going to end up censoring The Godfather because there's
All in the Family.
It's in that. You're going to censor Scorsese's films. You know,
All in the Family.
All in the Family, exactly. You know, I mean, where is it going to stop? And the thing is that, you know, with a movie like The French Connection, which is a fucking masterpiece. Okay, it's an amazing movie on so many levels. I mean, besides the great performances, but it's just how it was made and how it changed the way movies were made, how it changed the detective story, how, you know, I mean, that's noir right there.
Hey, you know, this is two middle-aged white guys saying this, and we realize that. And I feel I could say this on Michael's behalf as well. This is me now saying this. If you want to put a disclaimer on French Connection, fine, but don't tamper with the movie.
Oh, I agree. And, you know, TCM and what's shocking and really disappointing was that Criterion showed the movie censored. TCM showed the movie censored. Those are two places that I count on to preserve movies the way they need to be preserved.
Yes.
And, you know, TCM even did exactly what you're talking about, John, is that they showed some of the Asian film, that the way Asians were portrayed in films. They showed Gone with the Wind also. And before those movies, they had a roundtable discussion about the movies, you know, and talked about it's like, hey, you know, this was 1939 or this was 1932 when they're talking about, you know, some of the Mr. Moto films that
certainly Peter Lorre's films, yes.
And so that was how TCM, you know, handled that kind of thing. The idea that they would actually show something censored, and instead of doing what you were talking about, it's like if you want to be sensitive to people, and especially to younger people who don't understand and know that, you know, it's like, this is the way things were back then. These were those times. This was the vernacular. This was the language that was being used. But to show it's to show it cut, you know, is like to censor art, you know, and I'm sorry, I consider movies art.
I agree. And also as a journalist, I'm a First Amendment guy, and no, I agree with you, man.
It's incredibly disappointing, and it speaks everything for you know, like physical media is like, people were talking about how physical media is going out. It's like, no, just stream. You know, why do you? No, this is the reason, because I'll tell you what, you know, when it's streaming, anybody can take it off.
Yep.
I mean, not only can they censor it at any point, they can also just shut it down and you don't see it.
Yep.
You want to be able to see the French Connection the way it should be seen, you need to own the Blu-ray or the DVD. That's what you need to do. There's no other way to see. There's no other way to see it.
Right, and it's also, I mean, like Popeye Doyle was not a great hero. He was a flawed man.
Absolutely, but you
show his flaws.
Gene Hackman didn't want to do the movie. He hated the character. He did not want to do the film. He had to be convinced. Friedkin had to convince him to make that to do the movie, because he hated Popeye Doyle. He read it. He hated this guy.
Am I wrong? Was
it do this guy? I don't like this guy. I hate this guy.
Was it this film that for a while they were considering Jackie Gleason to play Popeye Doyle?
You know, I don't know that. I'm not sure. I don't know that.
I mean, and again, dramatically, he could have handled it.
Jackie Gleason could have handled anything. He was fucking great.
A great one.
He could, you know, you're talking to the guy who worships Jackie Gleason. It's like, you know, Gleason could do anything.
The Honeymooners was amazing, but man, that variety show is kind of tough to watch these days.
Oh yeah, oh, without a doubt. But you know, I mean, I'm not saying he never did bad shit. You know,
no.
Stuff, I mean, look, The Honeymooners is for me, it's the greatest sitcom ever. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, that's just personal bias, but I
No,
mean,
but it's
there's a lot of great sitcoms out there. But I read a biography of his, and it was like, it gave me the insight. Another very flawed person, very flawed man.
absolutely.
But his insight and his ideas. I mean, TV was growing, and he was right there, and he was an absolute pioneer. You know,
Absolutely.
when it came to television production. You know, you can look at Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball and say the
Yes.
similar things. You know,
Yes.
they were all brilliant, and they all knew what they were doing, and they were great entertainers. So I mean,
Agreed.
Gleason was an amazing entertainer, and he was a fucking great actor. I mean, he's unbelievable in The Hustler. He's unbelievable in Requiem for a Heavyweight. When the material was there, when the stuff was there for him, he was
He
great.
delivered. No, he delivered. That's true. Absolutely.
And when it came to The Honeymooners, he was in charge of the entire production. He was in charge of the writers. He was in charge of everything. And he had a photographic memory, and he never had to rehearse. And he was on the spot. He could do it. And he could perform. And you know, he was great. I'm digressing about Jack.
No.
But
I know the Noir. If it's as scheduled as usual, I would imagine the Noir Film Festival is coming to Chicago in the fall. Are you going to come?
no, it's in the summer. I think it's in August.
Oh, fantastic! All right, I thought it was September, but if it's August, that's
Sure, it's
great.
in August.
All right,
I won't be there.
All right, well, I'm going to have to use your magic or whatever so I can get a press pass or something. I really want to see Eddie too. Mullen.
Oh yeah, you got to go. You got to go. I mean,
well, and I know how busy he is, but I really hope that he'll come back on sometime, and we'll talk more about comics. And
yeah, I will. Yeah, we can see if we can try to get him on. You know, I mean, I think Eddie enjoys being able to talk about others. He likes to get away. And he's a comic book. He's a huge comic book fan. I mean,
know he is, and I get it, and that's the thing, man. Because when we had him on last time, obviously you want to promote Noir City, you want to promote the foundation, you want to promote the magazine, and it's like I'm like, okay, I get it, but I know Eddie really wants to talk comics, and it's like,
well, Eddie even said to me, I thought I was coming on to talk about comics, but it's like Vince and I wanted him to come on and promote promote Noir City. And what's great about the magazine, it's becoming incredibly popular. The print edition has just it's exploded, and it's
I'm going to show the covers again. There we go, everybody.
It's one of the best selling. The print edition is one of the best selling, movie magazines out there, and people love it. So, and I love doing it. I love working on it. I've been doing it since the first issue. I've been designing it, and I've known Eddie for a long, long time, and I've been working for him for a long, long time. So I really enjoy it. We have our annual books that come out, which are kind of like a compendium and the best stories of that year. And so I'm actually working on the new one of that. So if you go to the festival in Chicago, you'll see all that stuff for sale.
Not to mention not only Noir City, but of course your work on Ringside Seat. And here's a great painted cover from you. Is this an original?
That's the first issue.
Oh, there you go. Now, was this an original of yours, or were you?
No, that is a Robert Riggs painting. The Depression artist Robert Riggs, and somebody who doesn't get enough credit. People talk about George Bellows, who was a brilliant artist, and he was known for his boxing paintings, and Dempsey Through the Ropes, and
yes, the Firpo recreation, yes,
right, and he did lithographs also. But Robert Riggs was a big influence on me as an artist, and I did a lot of boxing lithographs, and which are like in the permanent collection at Georgetown, and he was my biggest influence. Robert Riggs, he was the biggest influence on me as an artist. So when I started the first issue, I wanted him to be his piece, his art to be on the cover. So
is this a famous fight, or is this just a great?
No, it's actually from I think it was a story. He illustrated a story in Saturday Evening Post, maybe.
Sure.
And I think the title of the piece is "Fixed Fight."
Okay.
As people are just throwing the trash. Anyway, so.
Well, I wish I could show the interiors of Ringside Seat, because truly, man, I know that you're all about like just dynamic presentation for these things, and they just make the articles and the photographs much more distinct with your presentation, your art direction choices, and it's great, man. And truly, I mean, it's a
Oh,
pleasure.
thank you. Well, I have to, credit to, first of all, to my good buddy, who was the editor-in-chief, Bill Detloff.
Indeed.
He is the person who compiles every issue. He's the person who gets the stories ready, and he also finds the writers, and he's found this great group of writers. Nigel Collins, of course, being one of the main contributors
Absolutely.
to the magazine, and just shout out to Nigel who and Eddie, who helped me get the magazine started. I would not have been able to get the magazine started without them, and I would not have been able to keep the magazine really going, without Bill. Bill Detloff is, I mean, his new Saad Muhammad book is just out. It's phenomenal. When Bill asked me to design the cover for it, I was like, of course, it's like, thank you.
I just had him on a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And Bill's a phenomenal writer.
Great writer.
And he is a fantastic editor-in-chief. I don't think Bill had any experience as an editor of a magazine before. And when I asked him to do it, he was a little reticent. It was like, well, I've never done this before. And it was like, I told him, you're a great writer. You're going to be able to do it. And he is. He's amazing. He's an amazing editor. And his knowledge of boxing is, beyond reproach for me, in my opinion. But his ability, his writing is the main thing. And that was the thing that Eddie told me when I wanted to start a magazine. And having worked with him for years at that point, that Noir City is all about the writing. Granted, my design hopefully is, gives it something great to look at, but the stories are what carry it. And the inspiration for me for Noir City is all the great writing and the great stories. That's what inspires me. And it's the same thing with Ringside Seat. But what Eddie told me is like, make sure it's about the writing. Make sure the most important thing is the writing. And that's what I feel with Ringside Seat. It's the writing. And that's, Bill is the one who kind of vets the writing, and he's the one who makes sure that we have that kind of writing. And it's great. I'm hats off to all those writers for Ringside Seat, for Noir City. They're all great.
Well, again, everyone should go to, you give the URLs for both Ringside Seat and Noir City.
So for Noir City, you can go to find out how to subscribe to Noir City. Right now, we don't have a subscription to the print edition. It's fulfilled through Amazon. So it's a print on demand through Amazon. Really great quality, I have to say. But the digital edition is what comes out first. And so if you donate $20 or more to the Film Noir Foundation, it's a great cause. And the Film Noir Foundation, we preserve films. We've restored numerous movies. So if you go to the website, which is filmnoirfoundation.org, and you will see there all the films that have been restored by the Film Noir Foundation. I'm lucky enough to work on all the DVDs and Blu-rays that come out, and you'll see a tab at that website for Noir City magazine. I think the tab is magazine, but you'll be able to find it on there. You'll find out all the details about Noir City magazine, how to donate to get a subscription, and a link to purchase the back issues that you were showing. So we are up to issue 37 now. All the digital editions are available. You can also get the links to purchase the the print editions that are out there. And then there's also you can go directly to noircitymag.com, and that is where all those digital magazines are, and they end up being sent to you as a PDF.
Okay.
And I designed those magazines in digital form. They have links to the movies and to trailers. So as you're going through the magazine, you'll see icons for you to click on and watch a scene, a particular scene that's talked about in the article or story, or a trailer, or the actual movie, a full movie.
Wow. That's wonderful.
For Ringside Seat, the website is ringsideseatmag.com. And there you'll find everything, all the like I said, we started out similar model, business model as Film Noir Foundation for Noir City, digital magazine. We started doing a print edition through Amazon with the 11th issue. Okay. So we are up to our 22nd issue, which is about to come out, which we're working on now. So at the website, you can subscribe. We actually do offer print subscriptions to U.S. customers. So if you live in the U.S. and you want a subscription to Ringside Seat, the print edition, you can subscribe there. And if you subscribe to the digital edition, it's available, everywhere, all over the world. And if you subscribe to the digital edition, you get the free copy of our annual. So very similar to the Film Noir Foundation that puts out a Noir City annual for the best stories for that particular year from the magazine. We do the same type of thing. We do a Ringside Seat annual where we take the best stories of that particular year. I design a book, we put it in a book form, and if you subscribe to the digital edition, you'll get that book for free. You can also purchase that book on Amazon. It's available on Amazon. All the books. I think we're up to our 5th annual.
That's awesome, man. No, I'm a big fan, and love talking to you guys, all the writers, John Stradley as well, Nigel and Bill, of course, and you. And no, I wanted to ask though, for Noir City, have you guys ever done a magazine about an all issue about all the radio from the 40s? I mean, there were so many they were inspired by the film product that was being put out there. And man, Pat Novak and Jeff Regan and a lot of Jack Webb shows, but the Philip Marlowe radio show, I think, is quite good. And a lot of radio detective stuff.
There's only two stories that I can remember that we did about radio. Somebody did a story about Wells.
The Harry Lime show,
the Harry Lime series, right?
The Lives of Harry Lime, the
Lives of Harry Lime. Yeah, right. So they did a story about that, and then
great series.
the Falcon.
Falcon is good. The Falcon's a fine show.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So that was those are the only two that I know of that we've done about radio.
Pat Novak for Hire is Jack Webb's show before he started doing Dragnet, and Dragnet itself, I think, is a great police procedural. But especially
the Dragnet, that early Dragnet stuff is great. I mean, when it got to the color TV series, it got kind of silly. But
he was busting Nicky's heads at that point. Hey,
right, but before that was really great stuff.
And they're all on. A lot of them are on YouTube and stuff.
Oh, that's good.
They're outstanding. No, the Black and White Dragons, but the radio show too. Radio show started in '49. I mean, it started, but prior to that, he had a show where he was a detective and he rented boats. Pat Novak for Hire, and I mean, the most purple dialogue. That was. She was as lonely as a warm beer on the bar, on the bar or whatever. Just stupid little metaphors like that throughout. I mean, it is so funny and great that way. And it's all the top radio actors doing it. William Conrad was the
Oh,
police.
yeah. There's a podcast that does the suspense that
Oh,
does
sure.
that does suspense, and of course, you got some of the top actors doing suspense, and
You're
also
right.
there were adaptations of the great film noir movies. I mean,
Sure.
everything from Postman Always Rings Twice to Mildred Pierce. I mean,
Yes.
these digested, like maybe half hour,
Well, they even did an
maybe-
hour. They even did an hour-long sequel to the Maltese Falcon
oh,
called The
really?
Candy
Okay.
Tooth, and Howard Duff was the radio Sam Spade, and he didn't
Right.
sound like Bogart, but he had a great voice and really was a great Sam Spade. And William Spear, the writer producer of Suspense, they called him the Hitchcock of the air because he really was great and doing these tight little
Yeah, those
30 or
suspense,
60 minutes,
that podcast, the suspense podcast, is really good because the guy who hosts it, he really gives you a background of. He tells you like not only kind of the details of like when it was originally broadcast, but he talks about who wrote it, the inspiration, and the writer, about the writers.
Yeah.
And there were some great writers, some of the great noir writers who contributed stories, who they did stories they based on these great writers.
All right, I gotta talk to you about and your editor about doing an all radio issue of Noir City because I Love a Mystery is another great show like that. That was a really great detective show, and yeah, I mean, I could literally
I
think.
can't. It's pretty hard to illustrate
Well,
a story for radio unless there's
but
behind the scenes
they
radio.
have those great black and white pictures of them in front of the microphones and stuff. And there have been yeah, I mean, I guess you'd have to like maybe hire an artist to do maybe a single page rendition of the Falcon or some of these other people. But like I said, Jack Webb, I mean, Pat Novak and another show called Jeff Regan Investigator, they were great, just standard gumshoe kind of half-hour mysteries and stuff. Richard Diamond started on radio as well.
Mhm.
And also Alan Ladd had that great 1 year show called Box 13, which was a post office box.
I'm not
And
familiar with that.
that's the conceit of the show is he would get his cases through this post office box, and he'd be off on another adventure. But yeah, Alan Ladd was terrific on that.
A lot of this stuff is great because it is on podcast. The whole Harry Lime series there's a podcast for it where they have the the entire series.
And also, like we were saying about a lot of these Warren publications and stuff, archive.org also has good collections. So
yeah, there's movies on there too.
Yes, there are.
Movies whose rights have kind of a lot of pre-code Hollywood movies are there.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, no, it's well, there you go, everybody. So great output from Mike Kronenberg, including the latest issue of Back Issue, featuring this wonderful Neal Adams cover by Mike, and also don't forget about the Batcave Companion, which has tremendous interviews, along with what's in Back Issue, but even more covering this period that Mike Urey and Mike have covered. Good stuff, man. Thank you as always.
No, thanks for having me on, John.
And I should give you a chance to promote your own podcast that you have with your son.
Oh yeah, the Kronenberg Chronicles, which is on a irregular schedule right now. Between my son and myself, just being busy, it's not easy. But we've had some good shows. So if you look for the Kronenberg Chronicles on Apple Podcast, you can look back at some of those shows that we've done.
And they're evergreen subjects. I mean, that's the great thing is that, I mean, you really, you guys are massive Columbo fans as well as other TV and film that you would like to talk about. No, I think it's great, man.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm quite busy just trying to keep up with everything right now. So I appreciate you having me on. I love talking about those old magazines because as a kid, not only did I buy comic books and love comic books, I love magazines. I love boxing magazines.
Yeah.
I have old boxing magazines from the 70s from when I was a kid, football magazines. I saved all my sports cards as a kid. So, I've got all of those. I just recently went through all of my comics because I bought a spinner rack. I bought a comic book spinner rack. So I went through all my comics and like kind of went through to find the ones that I wanted on the spinner rack. And so like the next thing is all my sports cards, all my baseball,
Oh, wow.
basketball, and football cards. I'm going to go through those and look through those to see exactly what I've got.
Outstanding.
So that should be fun.
Absolutely, man. No, I'm with you, man. It's a shame that, magazines now could be $20 per issue, and the magazine rack isn't what it used to be. And it's a shame because we really grew up, I think, near the end of the sweet spot era of wonderful magazines that would
Magazines were important. I mean, as were newspapers. I mean, I went to growing up in Miami in the 70s. There was just one particular newsstand that I went to. The guys knew me there, and I was able to buy, all the magazines, all the Warren magazines. I was interested in the Marvel magazines. I was interested in football magazines, the sports magazines,
Sure.
boxing, Doc Savage paperbacks, Star Trek paperbacks, and all the sports cards I bought, football, baseball, basketball cards, and comics. I'd go in there's the spinner rack, and the guy who owned the store, said, "Okay, Michael, you can take out all the comics from that need to go back to the distributor that didn't sell. Put the new ones on the rack, and I'll give you a free comic book if you do that." So
wow.
well, got off pretty easy for 25 cents. I got a free comic. But anyways, I love that place. And it was like, you walked in, it was like all of those things were in there, and out of town newspapers.
Yes.
All the out of town newspapers.
Yes, we had
New
that
York, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles. I mean, it was all there. You don't have that anymore.
No, well, you've got the internet now, but it was more exciting to physically hold this stuff in your hand.
Absolutely.
And think, oh my God, I'm reading the London Times. I'm reading Pravda. I mean, you name it. And it was literally the world at your fingertips. I completely understand, man. Yeah. What are you going to do? All right. All right. I guess
old men talking. What are you?
I know. We're on the porch yelling at clouds. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Always a pleasure, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you as always.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely. Tomorrow, everybody, 2 word balloons for you. During the afternoon, I'm going to be going transatlantic and talking to our good friend John McCrae, the wonderful artist who gave us Hitman with Garth Ennis back in the day and so many other wonderful things. He's in the midst of doing Judge Dredd versus Mars Attacks. Talk about retro. I think that's a very fun, exciting thing. And John's got the right kind of combination of action and humor sensibility that it's going to be a great presentation. Tomorrow night, Andrew Peepoy is going to join us, one of Chicago's great cartoonists who's had his runs at Archie Comics and The Simpsons Comics with Bongo. And he's bringing back his fun all-ages adventure series, Simone and Ajax. If you know your history of weird little animals from comics, if you know who the Shmoo was, very heavily inspired Ajax in that series. So that'll be fun. And then, like I said, later this week, a conversation with Ed Brubaker that I'll be presenting on Word Balloon audio. I'll have the audio here on the YouTube channel as well, but we're recording that on Thursday, so expect that on Friday. All coming up this week on Word Balloon Live. Until next time, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.